Let's talk about mental hacks for test day success, mental hacks to avoid that test day score drop. We've already talked a little bit about meditation. I want to go a little bit more into guided visualizations, specifically as they relate to our imagined best case and worst case scenarios. A lot of times, it turns out that our concerns are not nearly as bad as we thought they would be, and articulating them fully will help us feel more in control and less overwhelmed, help us focus on the positives. And ironically, that starts with writing down all your worries, all your concerns, and thinking them through. So let's, for example, ask the question, what happens in 3 to 5 years if I get my desired score, parentheses, on this LSAT administration? We've got to lower the stakes here because sometimes we think so much about what will happen if we don't get a good score, and we limit our scope to this exam when in reality, this specific test is not everything. Obviously, the LSAT is important, but only the highest test score counts. And furthermore, even if you did not get a good LSAT score, period, you would still be okay. Going back to that question, what happens 3 to 5 years from now? A funny thing happens. It turns out that for some students, their worst case scenario is not nearly as bad as they thought it would be. I had a student recently I was talking with on this very question. She was stressed, she was anxious, she was worried that if, despite multiple attempts, she could not get her desired score, she would have to go back to undergrad and get another degree in order to become a social worker or some sort of psychologist. And I happen to know quite a few social workers, and I know that you can major in virtually anything and go on to get a master's in social work. And this girl, maybe she majored in English or poli-sci, I forget what, but she thought she'd have to go back to undergrad and tell her parents, oh, I wasted 4 years of undergrad, got to go get a second BA. Turns out that was not the case. And so once we removed the stress around getting a great LSAT score overall, we could then move on to reducing the stakes of this particular LSAT exam, because retaking is more common than ever, and having to study for another retake or having to apply later in the cycle matters much less than it ever used to before. So really, there is no need to worry about placing all the stakes on this one test. You can go out there and treat test day just like another practice test that just happens to be administered with a proctor. You could even register for the next LSAT exam so that you know you have a backup already laid out for yourself. And that helps keep a bit of perspective, realizing that this one exam is not the only one. You want to do well on any given test you take, of course, but it's not life or death. And there's a funny thing you can do, which is simply to visualize a successful test day for yourself. Imagine yourself, and you could do this just in your mind's eye. You could do it while you meditate. You could lay down, close your eyes, and actually imagine what the test center looks like. Picture the desks, picture the proctors, picture the other test takers, and walk through a successful test day experience for yourself. Actually imagine the other test takers, imagine the test booklet, the feel of the newsprint paper, the pencil in your hand, yourself successfully bubbling in correct answers smoothly, seamlessly, not getting bogged down, not second guessing yourself, everything just flowing really nicely. And you might say, well, that's nonsense. If that works, that's the placebo effect. But the funny thing is that the placebo effect works. That's the crazy thing about this. Even if people know it's a placebo effect and that's why they're benefiting, they still benefit either way. So if you don't want to do this sort of thing, you've got to ask yourself, well, is it rational to do something seemingly irrational if it still gets me the results? The placebo effect works, and so even if you're not into meditations or visualizations, you can't deny their benefits. And this one here is from The Guardian, so fairly mainstream source. You could pretend if you want on the day of the exam that you're playing against your friend. Maybe your friend is taking the LSAT on the same day or not, but either way, make it a little bit competitive, make it a little bit of a game, and then you can reduce the importance you place on this crazy exam and avoid that fight or flight response, because after all, it is just a game. It is just another practice test. So those are some tips. We'll get more into simulating test day in future lessons, so stay tuned.